Respected dignitaries, faculty colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and dear students, very good evening to you all. Myself, Dr. Bobby Basu, Faculty Heritage Business School, take this privilege to welcome you all to this webinar organized by Heritage Business School. Now, Heritage as a group started its journey in the year 2001 and is backed up by Kalyan Bharti Trust, formed by a group of 22 like-minded industrialists and philanthropists of Kolkata who came together to promote higher education in India and in the state of West Bengal in particular. Heritage Business School is the management wing of Heritage Group and established in 2003, runs management program and is affiliated to Maulana Abul Kalam Azad University of Technology and is approved by All India Council of Technical Education. Under the visionary leadership of our top management, Heritage Business School has achieved many accolades. To name a few, in the recent past, Heritage Business School has been chosen by ET Edge, an initiative by Economic Times, as one of the best education brand in 2020. Heritage Business School has also been declared as the most preferred B School of the year 2020 in the East at the 13th ASSOCHAM Higher Education Forum. Now, at HBS, apart from academics, we organize industry institute interface sessions at a regular interval, where we invite experts from corporate houses and academia to share their thoughts with our students so as to enhance the practical knowledge of the students. Today, we are very happy to have amongst us Dr. Abhiman Das, RBI Chair Professor of Finance and Economics at Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Dr. Das will be sharing his thoughts on new policy initiatives by RBI to boost Indian economy. Now, to set the context, RBI's Governor, Shri Shaktikanta Das, has announced in a press meet a series of measures to be taken to soften the lockdown blow as caused by pandemic COVID. And he has emphasized mainly on the four measures. Firstly, relaxing the repayment pressure, and for that, banks to announce 3 months moratorium on EMIs. And this offer covers all the term loans like home loan, car loan, or personal loans. But the interest is going to be accrued over the period. In fact, this moratorium has been extended for 3 more months till 1st of August 2020. The second initiative was taken to enhance the, to ensure that the bank credit loans are sustained. And for that, RBI has reduced the interest rate by 75 basis points. That means repo rate has been decreased from 5.15% to 4.4%. And that means all the sorts of loans will be available at a cheaper rate. And third initiative which was taken by RBI is to ensure enough liquidity into the economy. And for that, RBI has pumped 3.74 lakh crores of money in the economy. And the fourth initiative was taken so as to minimize the market volatility. But sir, being a person from a non-finance and non-economics background, I have two questions in my mind. Firstly, with the reduced repo rate, with the reduced CRR, RBI has ensured enough liquidity in the economy. But in this pandemic situation, when there is a threat of unemployment, when there is a threat of salary cut, when both the supply and the demand side of the supply chains, global supply chains have been badly disrupted, who is going to take loans or who is going to take more working capital? This is question number one. And question number two is in context of relaxing the repayment pressure in terms of offering the moratoriums. I understand that if I go for moratoriums, then in that case, I don't have to pay the EMI during this lockdown, during this pandemic COVID period. But at the same time, my interest is getting accrued. So what would be your suggestion? If somebody has the ability to pay the EMIs, should he go for paying the EMIs or should he take the offer of accepting this moratoriums. With these questions and backdrop, I would now request our Director Sir, Dr. J. Mukhopadhyay, to introduce our speaker of the day, Dr. Abhiman Das, and take forward the session.
Thank you, Dr. Bobby. We are very happy that such an eminent person as Professor Abhiman Das, who is actually the RBI professor, chair professor of finance and economics at IIM Ahmedabad, has kindly taken out time. He's a very busy man and he is taking a few courses in this term, 3 courses. So he was naturally very busy, but still on my request, I told him that, even if take in the evening. So he has been very kind enough to take out time. So my first request to all the participants is try to absorb every word of what he says, because you don't get him every time. As you know, Dr. Abhiman Das is the RBI Chair Professor of Finance and Economics at IIM Ahmedabad. He's a postdoctoral research fellow from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, USA. He did his PhD, Population Studies, from the International Institute for Population Sciences, Bombay. Before joining IIM Ahmedabad, he was holding the post of director, that is General Manager at the RBI. In terms of academic affiliation, he is recipient of the Professor C.R. Rao National Award in Statistics for Young Statisticians in 2012-13. He was recipient of the Professor P.C. Mahalanobis Medal for 2008, Institute of the Indian Econometric Society. He is also certified associate of the Indian Institute of Bankers. His professional affiliation is he is a member of the Governing Council of Center for Advanced Financial Research and Learning, and he has worked in various capacities in the Department of Statistics and Information Management, that is the research department of the RBI, for over 2 decades. He is an associate editor of the Data Envelopment Analysis Journal and the member editorial committee of the Reserve Bank of India Working Paper, Series 2014-15. As you know, participants, the whole world, as Dr. Bobby was telling, is going through, not only India, the whole world is affected. And therefore, the central bank of all countries, including India, have been taking a very accommodative stance in that they're trying to basically pump in money into the economy, by which the money supply can be increased and therefore the interest rate can be kept benign. So basically, they have done, they have done the Sierra rate has been reduced to an all-time low of 3%. The repo rate has been reduced to 4%, and the reverse repo is down to 3.35%. By this, what it means is when you say reverse repo is 3.35%, it is basically telling that the bank should not keep their idle money parked with the RBI, rather they should lend out. And by doing the TLTRO, that is the targeted long-term repo operations, the Reserve Bank is giving a signal to the banks to actually lend to the NBFCs and to other people. So more than 3 lakh crores, the RBI is trying to pump in, and the RBI is also trying to make sure that this money goes to the NBFCs, the corporates and other sectors, because they're putting penalty to the banks if they do not lend forward. It has been a regular complaint of the economy that whatever RBI is doing, that transmission of that is not going to the Indian economy and to the general people. Now, if you look at what is the hard work that an economist faces, at one end, the growth, the GDP growth is a very important factor. That might be, there will be a contraction of GDP. The second big headache is the inflation. We have, if you ask your parents, those who are students, they will ask, and those who are teachers who actually go to the market know that every time you feel the pinch, because the inflation is extremely high. So the RBI is the main person as a central bank to make sure that the inflation is kept benign, probably at this sub 4% below level. Now, we have also been blindly copying, I don't know, but this is what globally is happening, that United States, UK, Japan, they have all been following a very dovish policy and accommodative stance by which money is being pumped into the economy at almost near 0% interest rate, which is very good for the people who are taking the money. But I sometimes worry about the Indian old people, because everyone is not having a government pension. So if the lending rate becomes so low, then for the savers, for the savers who keep their money, if their rates also come down, and with the longevity of life going up. So, it's very common now to see people living till 80, 85, 90. And if you retire at 60, then it becomes very difficult for that person to survive with the savings which he did at 60. So there are many challenges for the Indian economy. And I think we will request Dr. Abhiman Das. It's a very complex subject, no doubt. but he's a fabulous professor. So we'll request Dr. Abhiman Das to actually explain. I also want to share with you the secret, one of the secrets of his success. 2 days back, I requested him that, sir, can I have your presentation? So he said that I am still giving finishing touches and I'll send it to you. What it implies to all the participants, to all the students and the faculty here is that an eminent person like him is still working till the last minute, the last hour, to see that his presentation is perfect. I think we should also pick up this good habit from him, that, to work very sincerely, very diligently, if you want to achieve excellence. The second thing is this, with a lot of hesitation, I WhatsApped him yesterday that would you like to have a technical check, to basically, see whether your presentation is working properly or not. So he is a veteran professor. He could have said there is no requirement. But today, participants at 3 o'clock, he got in touch with Namrata and he did a small rehearsal to make sure that his presentation is running. What I'm trying to tell you, participants and faculty members here, is that if we want to achieve excellence like Dr. Das, then we have to be very sincere, very diligent, not only in the content, but also make sure that everything is all right, and you have to work very diligently. He's a very inspirational man. I had gone to Ahmedabad, to present a paper, and that time I met him. I was charmed by his knowledge as well as humility. So now may I request, with a very warm welcome on my personal behalf, on behalf of the Heritage Group of Institutions, may I request Dr. Abhiman Das to take forward his presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Bobby Basu. It's a bit unusual to start with 2 questions. So that's what I got today. And thank you, Professor Jain Mukhopadhyay, for such warm welcome and nice introduction. And what I understood from you earlier, that there will be many participants who are basically students. So I'm going to talk a few things, from that perspective as well, to give a kind of background from where it comes and whether things have changed or we are still, kind of good old days of monetary policy, what we are doing. I think that will set the tone. And then from there, I'll move to RBI's recent policy initiative.
Right.
Maybe I'll talk about 40 to 45 minutes, and then I'll take a few questions. Okay, right. So let me share the presentation. So and then I'll start. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you earlier, as well as the opportunity what you gave me to talk so many participants, some students, some faculty. So it's a pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you. My name is Abhiman. I teach macro at IIMA. I teach few other courses as well. I teach econometrics. I teach world economy. I teach real estate management. So the monetary policy, actually not just as a matter of subject I teach, monetary policy I teach the way I have done it for maybe over 2 decades at RBI. So that's why I think the way I talk in the class could be a little different than just seeing monetary policy from textbook perspective. So so let me give I think a plan for 45 minutes. I'm going to talk about the context from where this comes, and then maybe a little bit of evolution of monetary policy in India. Then I'm going to talk about the current framework and challenges, and then I'm going to take you through the recent RBI policy initiatives. And the important part for this, you will find that if you understand the context, then possibly you will understand the problems what RBI is facing today. If you do not understand the context, then possibly sometimes you will blame RBI. So I think that's why the understanding the current framework or the current policy, what we talk about, flexible inflation targeting, from where it comes and why that was adopted, that part is extremely critical. If you do not follow that, possibly sometimes you'll miss what exactly RBI is trying to do. So in order to take your maybe attention a little more clear, let me show you some nice picture. This picture is very, I think, very favorite for me because this picture tells you what are the facets of monetary policy we talk today. This is extremely important because a lot of that actually is now used in public discourse. So let me start with the first picture. All you can see on your screen is an eagle or a hawk. What you see, his eyes are very sharp, and what I have done, I have matched with his eyes with eyes of another gentleman. You can all actually see how this I have tried to match them together to see, and this is what when we talk about hawkish central banking. When all of you have seen possibly cricket at some point in time, you will see that a particular type of appeal, there would be an hawkeye which actually takes the trajectory of the ball up to the stump, and that hawkeye does not take its eye out of the side till the ball hits the stump. So that's the way when you talk about hawkish central banker. The central banker who does not take his eye off from the inflation targeting till it actually meets the target. That is what we got in the form of Dr. Raghuram Rajan. In fact, when he came here, inflation was high, so he had to adopt a degree of a new monetary policy framework which will actually bring back inflation. So that's I think the beginning point. And next, I'm going to show you another picture. This is an owl. You have all seen this, and I'm going to match this owl's eyes also with another gentleman. You will see on the right side, Dr. Urjit Patel. I'm not very sure whether I was successful matching the eyes, but what you can see here, at least some similarity between them. Dr. Patel, as a governor, actually spoke very little to the media. In one of his first media interaction, I think one journalist asked him whether he is a hawkish central banker or something else. His answer was something very special. He told, I'm not a hawk, I'm kind of an owl. I'm that type of central banker. Owl, owl does not sleep when everybody sleeps. So for him, monitoring the entire financial system was far more important than just to do a central banking job. So financial system stability was of prime importance for him. So these two gentlemen actually, brings forth very specific types of central banking which are relevant today. And then along with that, what we got is the current central banker, Mr. Shaktikanta Das, whom we can call a dovish central banker, who is a kind of happy reducing rate. His primary focus has been, or maybe the time when he has come, primary focus has been to reduce rates and to focus on growth. So I think this captures three different dimensions of monetary policy, focusing on inflation, focusing on growth, and focusing on, at the same time, on financial stability. All three are extremely important because monetary policy is not without any of them. Sometimes some forces, play in a bigger role, but in a sense, all three are particularly important. Why all three are important? I'm going to talk about it. It's nothing new. What all you can understand that monetary policy, what all three I'm talking today are actually the monetary policies of last 200 or 300 years history. So let me give a kind of context from here where I started. So the context is important, that what ought to be the objectives of a central bank. This is, and is this objective or the objectives of central bank got changed after a financial crisis of 2008, or that trade-off between financial stability and price stability somehow, I think, got mixed up. We did something, or we are too, I think, blindsided of the success of price stability that we neglected financial stability. These are, I think, very critical questions, and because these questions are so intrinsic to 2008 crisis, that's why we had to look back whether in terms of central banking objective, these objectives anytime featured at all or not. Look back and see what were the central bank's objective to begin with. The first objective or the first central bank was the Riksbank, 1668, Sweden. The objective of that was currency issuance and financing government. So this is where I think is extremely important. Central banks are created for currency issue and financing government. So if we talk about that, why should RBI finance government? But then you have to go back and see the purpose of central bank, what it was established maybe 400 years, nearly 400 years ago, was actually to support financing of government. Then in 19th century, in a big way, what we got, the notion of financial stability. So financial stability of 2008 was not new. It was there in central bank. And that time itself, we defined what we know as the lender of last resort function. Lender of last resort function is generally not used much unless you see there could be a system-wide risk in a financial system. Let me give one example. Maybe Reserve Bank of India has not, officially used it, many times, but it has of course spoken about it, but not used it. But except on one instance, I just want to share. If many of you would recollect, in 2008, there was a bank run in parts, particularly in South India, Bangalore and Hyderabad, on ICICI Bank branches, and that run was so huge that in one day, the company like Infosys withdrew 56 crore from ICICI Bank. So ICICI Bank was in real trouble. And finally, what happened at the evening? Reserve Bank, I have seen only one press release of Reserve Bank supporting this type of action. Reserve Bank came out with a small press release that ICICI Bank's financial health is fine, and the next day bank run stops. So that's the lender of last resort functions, exemplify the power of it. Then we got the public policy objective. Actually, public policy objective came in only in 20th century. And that too is a bank panic. It's a historical bank panic in the US, 1912. And that led to the establishment of US Fed. The Fed, what we know today, is actually relatively a new institution than many other central banks of the world. And this role actually got changed in a big way towards growth and employment because of Great Depression of 1929. And that time itself, the need for supporting growth and employment was embedded directly into the monetary policy making. So start from currency issuance to government financing, financial stability, public policy objective, then accommodative monetary policy for growth and employment. And from this actually accommodative monetary policy went on for quite some time till 1970, when inflation shot up very rapidly in the US. That the focus of central banks moved towards price stability. You see that the way we are moving from one objective to other, and sometime by doing this, possibly we forgot few things. We moved to price stability, and the period from 1970s, and particularly the period from 1990s to 2006 to 2007, most of the countries in the world had very high growth. Inflation was in control. We actually did not pay attention to the notion of financial stability at all. We thought the price stability can effectively ensure financial stability, and that was the biggest lesson what we learned, that price stability was not enough for financial stability. So then we look back, we had to bring financial stability as an explicit objective of monetary policy. Now think what I said with the three pictures what I have already shown. You can link it that the purpose of central bank actually combines all three. It all depends on the context. It all depends on the time. It all depends on the political establishment under which it works. Okay, so this gives I think a background to which it starts, and then to take this forward, 2008 crisis has given us quite a few new things. it actually led to what we got today: flexible inflation targeting, financial stability and macroprudential policy. We got Basel III, we got G20, we got Financial Stability Board, a lot of things, and all these things lead to better coordination across nation. And in this coordination, actually central banks got a lead role. In most of these meetings of G20, you will see central banks are effectively making a case for its own policy, what it can implement in every country. Okay, so this is the evolving framework, and with this evolving framework, in order to address 2008 crisis, we got something very new. And this new also, if you look back in terms of pure monetary policy framework, quantitative easing was not that new. It was also there even in, that's why Ben Bernanke, when he used it, he exactly knew what to do. And because the options, for him, was kind of limited because interest rate was so low, so he had to go for quantitative easing. And not only he did quantitative easing, he did quite successfully. He brought back US into a much higher growth path. Unemployment went down, I think, to a historical low. Actually, US led the recovery, where most of the other developed countries followed, and possibly the recovery what you have found in the US could not be seen with the same pace in developing countries, particularly, or middle income countries, like particularly China and India, to be kind of middle income country today. And with all these things, what has happened? Interest rate actually came down to negative territory. And to tell you frankly, the US quantitative easing was not the first one. Japan started it, and Japan lower interest rate happened much before the US had seen this in post 2008. So this is the framework on which we are working, or we are into, or the world is into. And from here, if you look at what we got in RBI, preamble says that we are going to issue a bank notes, run currency and credit system to countries' advantage. RBI had a lot of microprudential policies. Objective evolved also for RBI. Quickly, I'll just glance through what RBI policies can encompass. It's a credit planning. It's 1960s and 70s. RBI had what we call credit planning. Not even money planning was talked about. RBI did not have a department called monetary policy. RBI had a credit planning cell. So it starts, it was actually allocating credit. That was the most important part of RBI. India's need was to allocate credit. And because, in order to go for a little sophisticated monetary policy framework, you need financial market development. If the financial markets are not developed, you cannot implement few things. So that's why all financial markets development, institutional setting, openness of the economy, all these are contingent, all these are necessary, and based on which you can actually go for newer set of monetary policy framework. So once those things are into place, we move to monetary targeting. That was primarily based on Sukhumai Chakraborty report. I think one of the fantastic documents what we had. Every student must read it once if you would like to know Indian central banking. Then, and that went on from 1980 to 1997 to 98. Bimal Jalan came, and then we moved to something very new, something I think confusing also. Jalan found that in order to target money, you need to have a stable money demand function, and that actually grew during 1997, 98. So then, since the money demand functions relationship grew, so we went to something called multiple indicator. And in order to do multiple indicator, we actually did not know which inflation we are kind of targeting explicitly or implicitly. So this created a lot of problems. And then the multiple indicator, it had too many indicators. It was money, credit, inflation rate, exchange rate of returns of different markets, everything we tried. And that too, we augmented that with several other indicators like, survey-based other indicators. You put them together, make it forward-looking. You see that Reserve Bank was also trying to move towards a kind of better framework, but not exactly to what we have today. So we are experimenting with indicators. We are experimenting with expectations. We are experimenting, or Reserve Bank was experimenting with several other things, particularly forward-looking indicators, to draw information from forward-looking indicator so that monetary policy could be made more forward-looking. So I think things were changing. In the process, we also changed many things. We changed intermediate target, monetary target to cash reserve ratio. During 90s, everything was more of CRR and SLR. At one point, our SLR was as close as almost 40%. CRR was 15%. You can see how much money was impounded with RBI and how little freedom bankers had during that time. So see, from that 1992, after liberalization, the freedom what banking system got and the way RBI has moved forward is I think is quite exemplary. Taking every step by step forward and then finally bringing to the framework what we have today. So why this framework? Again, there was a need to change because of quite a few things. The first of all, we did not know what we are targeting, and if we do not know what we are targeting, then actually making policy becomes far more, I think, opaque. So that led to a lot of confusion in the market. Analysts did not know what exactly was happening, and then inflation was accelerating. There was a need to control for inflation. GDP growth was falling, and then there was an open debate started. Are we on to a good monetary policy framework? And at this point in time, we got Dr. Raghuram Rajan as the governor, and he felt that there is a need to revisit the policy framework, set up an expert committee. I happened to work under this committee as an internal technical person and did quite a few things with this committee. And then we recommended a few things. One of the, I think, the major or key objectives of this, objectives of this expert committee to recommend or to make policy more transparent and predictable. And this is why I think one has to take really the notions of what we got from Dr. Rajan. That we would like to do monetary policy which would be transparent and the monetary policy would be predictable. We do not want to surprise the market anymore. It's that market should know that what RBI is going to do, and this has a lot of implications. Subsequently, what I'm going to talk about, and transparent and predictable policy making needs a lot of good things to happen. Do we have all these things in India? So I'm going to talk a little bit on that soon. Okay, so then the recommendation was target CPI 4 ± 2, setting up a monetary policy, and because of that, the preamble was amended in 2016. We got a modern monetary policy framework, price stability while being mindful of growth. This is extremely important. See that price stability is put ahead of growth. This is, I think, this is all what we call hierarchical, policy objectives in a central banking framework. We have put price stability before growth. It is, we are, RBI is mindful of growth, but price stability is the prime objective. Okay, and in operational terms, flexible inflation targeting, 6-member committee will vote, 3 from the RBI and 3 from outside. Okay, so this is what we are. CPI inflation 4% ±2. Context, I told you, context is important, and in terms of a greater advanced central bank, I think we are very close to advanced central bank monetary policy framework of today. If you look at how advanced central bank's monetary policy is, it looks like this. US even till today, US does not target inflation. US inflation target is an implicit; it is not explicit target. And US target for inflation vis-a-vis US targets inflation and unemployment. And in both the dual target, there is no priority. Dual target, no hierarchy for the US, and explicit and dual for the Australia. India was very similar to that of US in terms of implicit, and then that was in pre 2014, and in post 2014, Actually, we have moved from this to the, these are typical inflation targeting nations, UK, Canada, New Zealand. India has moved there. So you can see that, we got a very new framework, almost as good as what most of the advanced countries' central banks are doing today. Okay, so this is the monetary policy framework, but this framework has actually associated with a lot of challenges. I think one of the, I'm just going to quickly, maybe in 5 minutes, I'll just summarize the key challenges, and then I'm going to talk about what RBI has done today or during last 2-3 months. Okay. The key challenges, first key challenges, I think, is about rules versus discretion. We have moved towards a kind of a rule. We are kind of moving away from discretion, and rules work with several several conditions. But one condition of rule, what we call time consistency issue. Rule actually works better, and in order to do that, you have to be time consistent. This notion, particularly for monetary policy, is understood a little less for the student. Let me give one example. Maybe as a faculty, if I announce to the student that next Monday there is a quiz on macro. Okay, I go to the class. So I announce it 3 days before. I go to the class and on Monday, and I tell that there is no quiz. So that means what I announced and what I did, I became time inconsistent. Okay, that's fine. But what I have achieved being time inconsistent is that because I told them that here is the syllabus, here is the the preparation, you all prepared, or the students all prepared. So my objective was actually achieved. If the objective was to make you learn, make all the students learn, the objective was achieved. I did not take the exam. Now think about the second time. Second time, if again I announce there is a quiz maybe Wednesday, then few students will start thinking that possibly there is a chance that this also will not be held. What does this mean? It means that as if my credibility becomes an issue. So if you want to make monetary policy rule-based, one has to be time consistent all the time. If you are not time consistent, then market is already will factor you and take you for granted, and you will become your credibility will be much lower. So this is one big challenge that RBI makes a rule. There are some pressure from the government. RBI had to do something else. So then your credibility, instead of only a inflation targeting or giving inflation priority, you do something else. Your credibility is a big problem. It's a huge challenge for a advanced monetary policy framework. Number two, I think this is where I think we have to be really careful to understand what it is. We have targeted a inflation index which has over 45% weight is in CPI. Think about any other countries which have, I have listed here many countries. No other countries have targeted CPI and which have so much of weight in food. RBI doesn't have direct control of food inflation. It can work indirectly in many ways, but directly it cannot. But think about it, a Reserve Bank is going to target an inflation index which 50% of which it does not have direct control. Then there is a huge risk. Then possibly there was something inside that we thought, Reserve Bank possibly thought that, okay, the weightage is 45%, India is growing fast, maybe in coming 10 years, this will change quite dramatically. We'll get back to as close as maybe 30%. 30% is quite reasonable. Many other countries have less than 20 to 25%. So, but if you see the change in our has been quite slow. So I think there is a huge risk there. If you see the that not only this change in consumption pattern has been slow, another problem I think what has cropped up, the recent survey of NSSO consumption pattern has been jumped. You know, the government has completely dumped that survey, which was to come for 2018-19. That is not there. So that means RBI had to wait for another 5 years to get another composition of CPI, possibly to get little lower compositional weight of food. So that makes RBI's challenges far more difficult than simply dumping the particular survey. Had we got that survey, possibly things would have been much easier for RBI. Number 3, a large part of crude oil, monsoon, cyclone, food, floods, then drought, many things which are completely exogenous, which RBI has no control, and this poses a lot of uncertainties. And then targeting inflation in that scenario is far more complicated. Then 4, RBI is not the only money supplier in the economy, only the source of money in the economy. If you know a little bit of macro, you know the role of money multiplier. Money multiplier, a part can be changed by the people's preference of holding cash vis-a-vis deposit. They do not want to put the money in the bank. So if that doesn't work, then the money multiplier actually works much weaker than the way we think today. So then if that doesn't work, you do not get a direct link of the currency in the banking system and what exactly it can affect the credit market. 4, that any central banking objective works with a lot of lag, 3-4 quarters of lag. Think about it, you change the policy today, in 3-4 quarters lag, you expect its effect to show in the real economy, but in the meantime possibly something else has happened, you have done some new policy changes, but if in order to get your effect shown in the real economy, you actually need to have a consistent policy framework. And in a country like India, when you have such lag of the effect of impact of monetary policy, holding or doing monetary policy, and that too inflation and output lags are sometimes varying. So making monetary policy simply based on inflation targeting could be really challenging. 5th, and we all know monetary policy needs to be forward-looking, because so what you do has to do lot to do depending upon what you will be doing, envisaging what it can happen after 2-3 quarters. So that means there is no short-term monetary policy making today. You have to think through, or you have to actually think through what can happen short term, but your eyes always have to be on the longer term, forward looking. So then how do you do that? You have to depend on expectations. So that anchoring inflation expectation in India is very challenging, because household expectations actually run very high in India. So that also poses a problem, that short-term fluctuations you do not accommodate in the monetary policy immediately. You need to do on a longer term context, and in order to do longer term context, you need to depend on inflation expectations, anchoring inflation expectations. But in India, anchoring inflation expectation has been far more challenging. And 5th, in order to do all these things, you need to do a good projection. RBI needs to do good projection of inflation and growth. Then only it can do good policy. But unfortunately, I think in both inflation and growth projection, I have done it by myself for over maybe 12 years. I know how difficult they are, and in many times you are going to either underpredict or overpredict. Reserve Bank has been over-predicting inflation for quite some time. I have given some numbers here. You can see that because if you over-predict inflation and your policy framework is long-term looking, then actually what policies you are taking, if that prediction becomes wrong, your policies will all turn out to be suboptimal. That's what has happened for RBI for quite some time, because it was predicting inflation much higher. And then this is, I think, one of the key points what Professor Mukhopadhyay was talking about, imperfect transmission of monetary policy. I'm going to talk a little more about it soon. And so then if the final objective is to show the changes of short-term interest rate or the repo in the actual credit market, and then finally leading into economic activity, do you see that happening? First of all, do banks in India depend on short-term changes? This question itself is very, see, suppose State Bank of India, has so much of deposit from us, and it does not depend on short-term money from Reserve Bank of India. So if Reserve Bank changes, why should State Bank do? State Bank changes rates. So that itself is an issue. So in order to address that, RBI has introduced term repo. RBI has done many things. I think what not RBI has tried to do to get transmission better. It started with, earlier we had prime lending rate, we moved to base rate. From there we moved to marginal cost of lending rate. Then we moved to external benchmarking. What all we are trying to do is a kind of direct linking with policy rates to something which bankers will follow. That means if policy rates are changed, banks will automatically show up that rates into their lending rates. But that's not happening. But you think about it on the other side of this. Pricing a banking product is left to the bank. RBI indirectly, instead of letting every bank or making every bank free to decide their price, RBI is pushing some kind of regulation to the bank that this is the way they can price their product. So this goes also against the so-called notion of deregulation. So there is the problem there. So with all these things, what we are finding that this is becoming very weak. Then along with that, you can transmit rates if there is a good banking system. India has a banking system with huge NP, accumulated NP. It's not just for 1 year. For the last few years, this is happening. So I think at some point I'll talk about this as well. And then finally, we have the government. What are we going to do if your policies contradict with government policies? So I think with all these things, you can clearly make out, I think the inflation targeting framework is far more challenging. It's not just calling 6 persons coming and voting on some policy. It is far more, I think, intricate, and then it is far more nuanced than what we all think about. So that's why the challenges are. Now, has price stability improved? I'm moved towards the current setting now. I'm going to what RBI has been doing. Has price stability improved? I think you all can see from this chart. This chart is a nice chart, and I have put together whichever indicator you choose, whether CPI, WPI, GDP deflator, and this red line is the 4% mark. You can effectively see that this is the time. Suppose we have introduced new framework. Inflation actually has been contained within the range of 4%, except in 2019-20 when it was shooting beyond 4% for some time. But otherwise, on an average, this is, now you can always argue that whether it is a luck or because, during these last 4 or 5 years, India has been witnessing the historically low crude oil price. And that has helped in a big way to contain inflation for many things. Crude oil is an intermediate product, and it can show up in many other commodities in terms of inflation. So that has helped. And of course, RBI, there are research on this, which also says RBI policies have helped. But this shows that kind of up to 2018-19, we are better off. Inflation started showing up. But what has happened to the growth? This is a remarkable different story. Growth, this is, I think, very critical for all of us. When you look back to the inflation, we saw that there is success. On the other side, you see what has happened. It's not just slide for one or 2 quarters. We are sliding downhill drastically. I have put this arrow here on this, I could not, I should have even pulled it a little bit on the negative side, because we are now into recession. Coming 2 quarters, whatever I think we do, the data, of course, is still not known, but I believe at least 2 quarters we are going to have negative, which is something very, very unusual for a developing country like India. And there are a few things happen here. This point, this date mark, I think this is one chart I show in the class also. This is the time when we had demonetization, and this is the time when we had GST. You can see after demonetization, this fell down, it went up for some time, and then from this point onwards, this has happened. So this background, this data, you have to keep in mind while thinking about current policy setting. Why that current policy setting may or may not work. And then let me speculate a little bit. Let me stress back that during the period what has happened, and this is, I'm not telling that these are all, I'm going to talk from my own research. That's why I use the word speculate. Little bit of speculation let me try to do, and then see if we can link back with this growth trajectory, what has happened. 2016 November, demonetization, huge influx of liquidity in the banking system. As a consequence, we actually corporate bonding, historically low corporate bonding. It was around 7%. And government yield also went down. Both have a lot of liquidity, inflation was low, what I showed you earlier. Both showed a positive outlook. That actually, that's why we came up from there quite quickly. But that did not last long. It actually lasted only for a year. Reversal in 2017 October, just about a year. Bond market had a very sharp upturn, because, and that too when RBI did not even change policy rate. Think these sequences, what happened. First, why did this happen? Growth prospect of Indian economy turned unfavorable. CPI inflation for a few months went beyond 4%. Finally, or most importantly, government stepped up a borrowing program because there was the news of fiscal slippage, poor implementation of GST. The collection was not as expected as thought of. So there was all these things showed a bleak outlook for the overall economy. This showed up in the corporate default risk that showed within this corporate risk are default risk are building up. That showed up in the hardening of corporate yield, what I told earlier. And along with this, what we got, September 2018, IL&FS crisis. Think about it, a AAA rated company came under severe stress and defaulted. A AAA rated company defaulted. Such a huge company defaulted. And that triggered massive liquidity crisis and that of course had the repercussion on the bond market, a series of default, downgrade, credit downgrade. This actually spilled over to mutual funds, investor lost wealth. What not happened? It was havoc the entire financial market, and that matter even got worse when DHFL, another large NBFC, defaulted. All these things had cascading snowball effect into the banks which had exposure. And if the banks had exposure to all these things, what are we going to see in the banks' behavior? Banks were already, I told you, already were struggling with large accumulated NPA. And with this, they faced this. And the resultant, the behavior of bank was excessive risk aversion. They just do not want to give any credit. And this is what I think is a kind of, I think one question what Professor Bobby was asking at the beginning provides some bit of answer to that. And what has been the RBI's trajectory is the following. RBI is doing, I think, cutting rates. This is from maybe almost close to demonetization. This is the time point when Mr. Satyakanta Das took over as the governor. And from that point onwards, you see rates are actually declining. It has fallen. It has come to 4%. The reverse repo is 3.35%. Not only that, CRR has been cut, SLR has been cut, and this all have been happening for last few years. but things are still not showing up. With all these things happening, and juxtapose all these things with what has happened to the Indian financial market and link that with the banking system. Now, along with this RBI policy trajectory, what RBI has been trying to do to address the weak transmission, what has been a history. It's a kind of problem for many years. What to do with this? And this, I have told you earlier, that you want to reduce rates, and the rates are not transmitted to the real economy. Lending is not, coming down. 2019, RBI reduced 135 basis point rates, and then your effective rate decline was not even 50 basis points. What are you going to do? And RBI, RBI does many open market operations. Of course, all you know, RBI also does OMOs in a different way, open mouth operations. RBI actually talks to the market. It calls the banks. It calls NBFCs. It talks to all market participants. It talks to the analysts. It actually tells them what it wants to do. So, open market operation is, of course, for liquidity injection and absorption. Even open mouth operation also did not work. Now, what to do? RBI tried giving the twist. The twist is a very famous song, and twist was, used by the Fed in 1962, and RBI used the twist and tried many things, tried few things. And what was the twist? Twist is you simultaneously, the idea of twist is that overall liquidity of the system you do not change. Simultaneously, you purchase long-term securities and sell short-term securities, in a way balancing, same amount you purchase. And if you buy long-term bonds, what is going to happen? Demand for long-term bond goes up, and if demand goes up, prices increase. If prices increase, that will lower yield. So that means you are effectively long-term yield you are able to reduce by doing a twist of both purchase of long-term security and sale of short-term security. So RBI was doing this, and if you can reduce long-term yield, effectively that tells us that over the long-term loan rate should come down. So that means if long-term rate comes down, then the purchases what you make by using credit, like by cars, which are kind of long-term investment for long-term consumption, expenditure, or investment, financing project, houses, buying a new houses, all these things can be incentivized by doing the twist. An expected return, not only for the lending, even because the return for the long-term savings also will dip. So that will also move consumer preference from savings to spending. So that has, but do you think that has it worked? That is what is most important for us. This is I think RBI's operation twist. You can see that at the first instant during December to January, I think the first phase, if you see about a month or so, impact on the longer term yield actually failed. There were impact on the credit market. Yeah, the lending rates actually went down, not significantly, at least to some extent. But that actually was kind of shortly. Even in April 2017, April 27, 2020, RBI has again done another twist, but that effect has been limited. You do not find it to be that strong. And then this is the twist. The twist did not work. RBI did not stop there. Then let us go for RBI's unconventional monetary policy. RBI also used unconventional monetary policy tools. And quantitative easing is an unconventional monetary policy tools. It went for long-term repo operation. Because the moment you do long-term, there is a tenure getting inbuilt into the entire repo operation. So that will translate into the lending rates of the bank. So RBI actually opened up a long-term repo in a big way from long-term LTRO to. But not only that, it started with long-term repo. From there, it also started targeted lending long-term repo. The targeted means it will target the sectors where that money is possibly needed due to COVID's unprecedented pandemic, what we are seeing today. So, but the one point you can see that RBI, what all they are doing, LTRO, TLTRO. One point you must recognize, LTRO, the first part actually was not a COVID response. First part was a response to the sluggish monetary policy transmission. TLTRO onwards was a more kind of, I think, a response to the COVID. So TLTRO was extended to window 2. Second window, it was given to specific funds to investment in credit bonds, commercial papers, and then also it was special liquidity facility to microfinance, MFAs. So all these things RBI have been doing. But one point, what I have put in bracket is in red, is RBI is trying all these things via banks. I think this is where possibly a large part of problems lies, that, or large part of our understanding lies, that if RBI's responses are enough to spark growth, if RBI keeps on doing things where it is via banks, do you think it's going to work for us? Think about the data. I'm going to show you some data. LTRO, it was absorbed. I think a large amount of that was absorbed. TLTRO was absorbed. Now think about TLTRO 2, then special liquidity facility to mutual fund. You see that out of 25,000, only 12,000 was absorbed. Out of 50,000, only 2,000 was absorbed. Our refinance facility to SIDBI NABARD, only 29,000. So that means, in effect, net injected liquidity of RBI is not this total. Many people have been talking, even Professor Mukhopadhyay also told about the total of RBI total notified amount. That's not the amount we should actually talk. In terms of liquidity for the system. In terms of overall liquidity, utilized is only 2,70,000 crore. Do all of us in this webinar, do you believe that is it enough to overcome a pandemic? Think about it. The pandemic, what we are seeing today, it started from health to economy. But our economy was already in bad shape before the pandemic. So that's why the problem is not just the handling of the pandemic. Problem is the accumulated issues what we have got before the pandemic itself. And along with that, if you see the responses, what we have seen is in terms of saving, what we find now. We are before a recession, and see what we are doing. All middle class, what we are doing, currency in circulation is rising. So are the bank deposits. We are holding a lot of cash with ourselves. We are keeping money in bank deposits. That means, why generally otherwise you will keep money. You will keep money either in real estate, you will keep money in the stock market where ownership is an important. Actually, you do not save money in those. So you are saving money because you do not have enough trust for other alternative investment. You keep money only in the form of bank deposits, or you hold cash. And at the same time, credit growth is only 6.3%. Then what are you going to see from the banker's point of view? They do not want to lend because of their other problems. So this actually, we are in the face of a recession, and this is what maybe John made Maynard Keynes at points, before recession, he said, I think this is possibly a paradox of three. If we do not spend, actually, what is going to happen? We are not going to boost investment and productive investment, and then finally it will actually lead to cutting investment, cutting further output, cutting further GDP. That's what we are going to see if we do not act at this point in time correctly to deal with it. And one of the basic, I think, basic feature of this particular time or dealing with this crisis is not just the central bank. Government has a much bigger role to boost consumption, to boost spending. That part also, I think I must tell this to you. I told you earlier also, these are my personal view. I think the boost from the government has also been quite limited. And along with this, what you find in the liquidity in the market? You find that what RBI is all trying to do is linked to the banks, and what banks are going to do? They do not want to lend because of huge risk aversion. And first of all, demand is not there. Banks do not want to lend. Corporates are over leveraged, and everything as a macroeconomic policy making, what you want to do from a central bank is not a very nice time at all. And then what banks are doing? Banks are actually parking money back to RBI. This is what I think Professor Mukhopadhyay was also talking earlier. You know, RBI, while defining the role of RBI, we talk about RBI is banker to banks and banker to government. But what we find today, RBI is actually the bank is actually banker to RBI. It's a reversal role what we find. And then how to deal with it, possibly we do not know enough. Why? Because India did not see recession, long time. It's about 40 years. India has not seen recession. So how to deal with it? Also, we do not have much understanding to do that. And then a lot has been said about how best we can push money to MSMEs. And MSMEs, if we know their behavior, you will clearly find the MSMEs, banks do not serve much to the MSMEs because banks follow a different credit, underwriting or assessment culture, which most of the time the MSMEs cannot provide such documentation. So MSMEs are actually better linked with NBFC. So I think if RBI opens up some window to lend the better rated NBFCs, possibly there is a chance to push liquidity directly from the central bank to MSMEs. But otherwise, with the current juncture, it looks quite I think limited. So I'm going to stop here. So thank you very much. I think I may have taken 5 minutes additional, but I'm happy to take the question. Thank you very much.
I think thank you very much, Dr. Das, for a very comprehensive presentation. I think I'm very happy to inform you that because of technology, you are at Ahmedabad, I am at Calcutta, we are at Calcutta, but we have a lot of fan following, it appears, because a lot of people have logged in from Bombay to hear to you. So if Geeta Menezes is there, Geeta, can you ask the question directly? She's from Mithibhai College, Mumbai. So Geeta, can you ask a question directly if you're there?
Okay, I'm Geeta Menezes from Mithibhai College, and we have this WhatsApp group, okay, where all the professors, all the degree college teachers are part of this group. So I got this information through WhatsApp group, right? Yeah. Okay. Now, as far as my question is concerned, India's foreign exchange reserves are at a record high. We have reached $500 billion US mark, and still you see RBI buying dollars at every opportunity. Sir, could you please elaborate on the logic behind this mop-up?
Okay, ma'am, please don't call me sir. Okay, yeah. So I'm just Abhiman. I think that's enough for me. Okay. So I think you have to again look back why these things can happen for RBI doing at this point in time. See, the other part I just mentioned about that even the government did not do enough, and one major reason for government not spending or open up more funding opportunities or direct funding opportunities to boost consumer demand was the risk of a rating downgrade, sovereign rating downgrade. We had one, but that downgrade actually could be quite severe if you find few other indicators are also not supporting it. I think while getting credit downgrades, what are the key parameters to follow? Key parameters mostly we see, of course, we see growth outlook, we see inflation outlook, we see the budgetary or our fiscal position. We of course see whether we have enough import cover. We also see what has happened for India. I think in addition to all these things, we also see the stability part. That's why from beginning I'm emphasizing the role of financial stability. So in Indian case, the financial stability has played a much bigger role. So I think in order to compensate some of the warring signs which can effectively get another credit downgrade, RBI needs to show that there is a central bank. RBI is a central bank which is AAA rated. You cannot doubt this particular institution in terms of credit rating. Okay, so that's why if RBI provides enough cushion towards it, so possibly that gives a signal that here is a central bank which has enough backup, which that's why Dr. Rajan used to build a strong balance sheet. We have a strong balance sheet. We are ready for the rainy day. I think that is one reason. I'm not sure whether that's the only reason, but that of course is one reason for Reserve Bank to build up reserves at this point when possibly you think it will contradict. Yes, thank you.
I'm particularly happy that we have a lot of people, Dr. Das from Bombay. So that's very, very nice. That shows what a big star you are, that, though we are conducting Calcutta, so we are having it. So Dr. Das, Vipan Das, we want to really thank you because you gave us a historical perspective and you told us about the inflation, the growth, the financial stability, the three things they're trying to do. And from the multiple indicator framework, then, initially it was only CRI, SLR, and how it has really come down. And we are now moving into flexible inflation targeting. We are moving into what the advanced countries normally kind of do. I think the problems you rightly said was that India has no reliable data on employment. So, and the Indian banks are saddled with huge NPAs. You gave that example. So that's a huge thing with ILFS and DHFL defaulting. Dr. Iman Das, like ILFS and DHFL defaulting, but the banks keep a hawk's eye on this. Don't the banks get any indication, early warning signals before ILFS becomes from a AAA to default grade? What is the reason that the banks cannot monitor and find out before they're defaulting?
I think the signs were there even 6 months before, but one point is the ILFS was a very large, kind of too big to fail type of institutions. You thought that this will not be that different because there will be, of course, government backing. You have seen the government has finally backed ILFS. So I think the risk, what banks possibly did not see, that corporate vulnerability was already building up. I think some degree of oversight was there, but this is where sometimes you become little complacent about credit decisions. So this happened and when it is ILFS, government is going to back. So then it gives you a kind of government guarantee to lend, and that happened for many banks, and that it turned out to be, I think, a big problem for the banking system.
Achha, Pooja Shah is asking a question which even I like to resonate, that we are also in India targeting almost lowering the rates, like America is of course at near zero and Japan is negative. But if we move like that without any social security system, don't you think it will affect the savers of money, especially the retired people who are retiring at 60 and live up to 90? And if the rates of interest come down, should India also follow that kind of a zero rate policy? That's what I'm asking.
See, I think this is a very tricky question. The thing is that what RBI is trying to do is injecting a lot of liquidity, not going through the channel of Monetary Policy Committee. Let me twist this question from different perspective. See, what RBI is trying to do, injecting a lot of liquidity, and decision to inject those liquidity through LTRO, TLTRO does not require MPC's nod at all. MPC has only the prerogative of MPC is only for repo. So this is what I think Urjit Patel wrote in one of the newspaper, that if you want to have a real inflation targeting framework, you can do these things, injecting liquidity by reducing rate to some extent. So possibly in India, you will find rate going down even further. Even the last rate cut of 40 basis point was not good enough to face a pandemic. You, as a common person, possibly you would have expected that even much larger. So RBI is holding its power, its ammunition with itself for time being. You will find possibly further rate cut. But your point that this rate cut will be, affecting the savers part. That is true. It's going to affect savers part. But this is an unprecedented time. India is going to face recession. So for till the time we see our growth is back to positive, actually these steps are necessary to inject liquidity or cut down the rates further. So for that, possibly there will be adverse impact on the savers. Yes, but if we can get back quickly there, India is such a large country where demand, you do not think that with 1.3 billion people, demand will be choked up so long. So the demand will you have seen even with supply chain gradually getting back, things are looking up in many ways. So possibly we may not get a longer recession the way developed countries are going to see it. For time being, we need to do much more extraordinary things than what has been done. But again, contingent on doing things through the banks, not going to work. Yes, I agree. There will be effect on savers, but that effect possibly could be short-lived. And in terms of recovery, I think we may not see a V-shaped recovery. There will be, I think, little kind of U-shaped India recovery. So in that sense, I think little longer pain. But the risk is with U-shaped recovery, we may not get back to 8% growth. We may get back to what we call Hindu growth of 3 to 4%. That's the real risk, because our banking system is still in big trouble, and unless we clean up the banking system, I think getting back to 8% growth is extremely difficult. And this is where most of the developed countries, follow up to your question, how could they go for quantitative easing? The reason for developed countries again going for quantitative easing is the following. Post 2008 crisis, most of the developed countries' banks have been adequately recapitalized and timely recapitalized during last 10 years. India, in the process of telling that it is taxpayers' money, why should we put it there? But we have not only delayed it, we have inadequately recapitalized the public sector. And that has resulted to a situation when no banks wants to lend. So I think until we get banking system back on its track,
right,
we will get back to the positive growth rate, but we may not get back to 8%.
I also had a lot of discussions with Dr. Rimu Chaudhary, who is our economics teacher. So Dr. Rimu, would you like to say something at this juncture before your vote of thanks? Dr. Rimu? We can't hear you. Unmute yourself. Rimu, unmute yourself, please. Rimu, you have to unmute yourself. Yeah. Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
I was thoroughly enjoying the session because I remember my honors days, because he's a great teacher. He has proved that he's a great teacher. I was remembering, the paradox of fate, monetary policy, the background, the facets. So I was, I was just listening what is happening, and I thought that I will be asking about the, targeted long-term repo operation. But he has already given the actual figure that 2,70,150 crore has been absorbed. So my question is, why the RBI? What exactly triggered RBI to introduce it in India, and how much has it done so far? And if the absorption is only 2,70,150, what should be the take of RBI right now?
So I think you have seen that the liquidity facility from the Reserve Bank is not getting a warm response from the banks, because what is happening, the channel from bank to the finally to the industry or to the consumer is somewhat weak. What is running credit for India for last couple of years is basically a retail loan. You find the entire corporate sector is not going for higher investment. because of many other problems what I have talked about. So I think unless that, you know, the RBI is, I think, liking everything through the banks could be broken. I think this channel to push money to the final economic activity generation would be difficult. I think possibly we'll find some new avenues of RBI will be coming up. One of that I talked about is that it can open up window for directly to the good NBFC. It can give directly to the mutual funds which are rated, and you know, some of the NBFCs are monitored by RBI like bank. It is not that RBI doesn't have control over them, it does. So I think they can open up, I think, further facilities to them, and because NBFCs are much closer to the entire MSME sector, which actually runs actually employs maybe 63 billion people. Actually, that can, you know, quickly sort out many other things. You can also tell many other window you can talk about. You can open insurance sectors. You know, finance sector is not just bank. You have many other you know, participants who can effectively you know, contribute to the entire pandemic recovery. You can go to the corporate bond market. You can go this link. You know, I was talking to a group of students. Suppose you target giving some facilities to Maruti, for an example. If that can be worked out, Maruti, under Maruti, possibly 5,000 MSMEs over down the supply chain. If you can try to, and you know, one of the biggest problem here in India, that first of all, we do not know how many MSMEs are there, and we do not know how to reach out to them. But if you go to these big corporate like Maruti, they exactly know whom to target, who are their suppliers. So you can actually push liquidity via different channel. No, I think we need to open up our minds and explore newer avenues when banks channels are not working at this point in time. Thank you very much for your question.
Dr. Das, one more question. Our student Satyabrato is asking that, you know, internationally the fuel prices are coming down. Now the government, the least the government could have done was to pass on the price, you know, the international price hike downwards. And the government is doing the reverse. The government has increased the price of diesel petrol by 8 rupees per liter. So not only is not government passing on the international price hike, but you know, also when a price decrease, they're also taxing. So the consumer demand, they would have built up by lowering the diesel price in particular, no?
Yeah, I think you are very right. Actually, I told you that in the presentation, I think one of the biggest exogenous thing is this one. But this exogenous thing is used to set our home right. Actually, it is supporting budget now. So instead of supporting the consumer, government is taxing and getting its lot of tax revenue from out of this. So this is a time, I think, because you know, where are the resources available for government? When Prime Minister came and told about 10% of this, out of this 10%, a major part was of RBI. And RBI, 50%, you know, that as money is not actually is taken. So you see that, and in terms of total fiscal package, also is you know, not large enough to boost such a large economy. And in that sense, government doesn't have enough avenues for revenue now.
No, Dr. Das, like Japan has given a $1 trillion stimulus, which is 20% of the GDP of about $5 trillion. India can let the fiscal, they can miss the fiscal deficit target and, you know, pump in money. That's what we are saying. Is it possible?
It is possible, but India has been too worried for credit downgrade. I think a lot of decision at the government end has been at the with the understanding that possibly we have to avoid the credit rating downgrade further. I think this has, and you know, this is where again goes back to GST, that GST collection has not been encouraging. Again, where do you get GST if GDP was not growing? So I think all these things are kind of directly linked to a condition where we are currently into now. So effectively,
no, but Dr. Das, I will tell you something. In Calcutta, it is
yes,
so heart-wrenching. You know, the price of diesel has gone up so much. The public, their people are not running the private buses. So, you know, when you go in the car, you see in the bus stand, there are 25 people waiting for 1 hour for a bus. So, you know, that is not fair, I think, for the people of India, that, you know, rather we don't worry about what Fitch and S&P will think. I think we have to first think of the people of India.
true. I completely agree with you. If you ask me what would have been my view, exactly I'll go by with you. Not only that, with such a huge demand crash, India is witnessing increasing inflation. So it's a both way we are putting ourselves into trouble. That any increase in diesel or petrol price will show up in inflation. That's what is happening. Inflation expectation has gone up, and so I think as a common consumer, we should have been much more accommodative, both from the government, both from the FISC as well as the central bank. But somehow I think our responses has been limited, to the sense that we have tried many things, of course, and a part of the major I think emphasis has been what I told you, open mouth operation than open market operations.
And Suchita Krishna Prasad from Bombay. Suchita, would you like to ask the question yourself, Suchita? She is saying that Professor Deepak Nair is recommending helicopter money. What's your take on it, sir? She's asking.
So these are all different options. Okay, to tell you, just to what is the standard response of a classical macro response for such a decision? Is government spending? You have to increase spending. So there are various means by which you can effectively allow consumer to spend. So I think these are different ways. There could be subsequent repercussion, but I think we must try at this point in time to reach out to consumer or support their spending as much as possible, be it through direct transfer, be it through NREGA, and then of course we have to target the poor people, because they are, of course, marginal propensity to consume is much higher. So I think in that sense, all these options are actually worth trying. Okay, so because we are facing a pandemic, you remember, and we do not know how long this is going to last. If we think that by September everything will be right, then you can take a policy, but you don't know. Yeah.
Right. Dr. Das, it's almost 1.5 hours. So last question is from Mr. Amey Kurade, same as what Dr. Bobby Basu was asking, that this moratorium on EMI payments, right? So
Yeah.
what's your take on that? Should during the 6 months, should they collect it, because it will affect the profitability of the banks and also ultimately affect the savers of the money, because someone has to pay it. So should the bank be charging interest or interest? Your personal opinion. We're not taking the opinion of RBI or anyone. I'm just taking your personal opinion. Or what should be done about these EMIs during the COVID period?
See, I think moratorium has been in practice in India for many things. We generally give, when things are wrong, we give a kind of rope to many things. But at this point, moratorium possibly would be useful to give a sentiment boost for the consumer. But I'm talking only as a personal view, that too for the consumer segment. But if you think about the moratorium on the other side for MSMEs, I would have expected at least for 3 months of waiving of everything for them. It is not just for their loan, their GST, their utility bills. I think on the other side should have been complete waiver. And for I think common consumer, EMI payment would have. I think this is a kind of standard RBI I think response. Okay, nothing new in it. So RBI would have been happy to. I think 3 months moratorium is okay. So the bank will not suffer that.
Achha, one last question from Mr. Purushkar Chakraborty from the Mumbai School of Economics and Public Policy. Mr. Purushkar, you can ask the question yourself. We'll be very happy to hear from you. Mr. Purushkar.
Okay, so I'm Puraskar from the Mumbai School of Economics and Public Policy. So talking about the Atmanirbhar plan that has been adopted recently by the government of India, the central government that is. So what do you think about the dominance of a monetary stimulus as opposed to real fiscal stimulus within the plan? I mean, monetary stimulus obviously dominates. I mean, we have seen unprecedented credit facilities, loan guarantees, and asset purchases, as opposed to direct provisions of undertaking tax cuts or issuing more expenditure in terms of fiscal projects, etc. And it has also been implied that loans have a greater multiplier effect as opposed to, I mean, uh, direct tax cuts or expenditure plans. I mean, which seems to be a little superficial. Moreover, don't you think that we have to emphasize the importance of necessary deleveraging at this point, as opposed to piling on more debt into unviable entities? For instance, Mudra loans have seen a huge default rate of up to 15%. So we might have to look at the potential moral hazard problem, because essentially, I mean, what banks could do is, I mean, take access of the credit facilities that have been made available and use it to pay back, I mean, whatever losses that they had incurred on the Mudra loan. I mean, to ameliorate.
Mr. Purushkar, we understand your question. Now let Dr. Das answer because it's pretty late. So, Dr. Das, can you please respond?
Yeah, I think the first question, which will have more dominance, I think the standard answer for this would be, at this stage, it should have been fiscal dominance for addressing the concern of a country which is developing. We are not a developed country, number one. And number two, of course, we need to have monetary stimulus, because finally it is the finance which runs the economy. So that was also necessary. But I think the first response would be to increase spending. Government must do things so that consumers spend more. It is the spending which will get growth back. Otherwise, we will be in the trap of what I told you, that we will start saving, that will finally cut down growth. It will not increase. The second one, I couldn't hear you properly, so I think I'll stop it here.
Okay, it's more than 1.5 hours. Maybe Dr. Das will have to have one more session with you, because today, like what I've always done in wherever I've been, I've always started that session in time. This is the 11th webinar I'm having, and we always start in time. So I think the software did not allow many participants to come in. And even now, I'm getting a lot of questions, but which I cannot, we cannot take because past 8:35 now. So Dr. Das, a very, very big thank you. We definitely inviting you when you are coming to Calcutta. We definitely want to this thing. Achha, one last question from my side. Since you are associated with Ramakrishna Mission, can you tell us how it has helped you to shape up as a person? Ramakrishna Mission experience, please.
I think it teaches you many things. Okay, I cannot tell you what Ramakrishna Mission has done. I think I'll tell you, maybe my son possibly has connected. I do not know, so I'll tell what he said about me. That my son, he was talking to some of his friends and some seniors. He told me that he has never seen his father getting angry.
Okay.
So possibly patience, humility, many things I think Ramakrishna Mission does.
Okay. Yeah, we totally appreciate that. Okay, Dr. Das, with a request to again come, please come.
Thank you.
And also, I think we might have to have one more webinar with you with the kind of demand you have generated. So I think now the formal vote of thanks by Dr. Rimu Chaudhary of Faculty of Economics.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Hello,
Dr.
am I
Rimu.
audible? Am I
Yes,
audible?
yes.
A very warm and graceful evening to our most valued speaker, Professor Abhiman Das, and our director, Professor J.N. Mukhopadhyay, all the managing committee, all the organizing committee, participants, my beloved students, my colleagues, everybody present here. It's my privilege to propose a vote of thanks and acknowledge the contribution of the people, those who worked very hard to make this session a successful one. But on behalf of Heritage Business School, I would like to extend my hearty thanks to Professor Das for his wonderful presentation and thoroughly academic session, what we enjoyed throughout. And he actually, that you have given us your valuable time out of your very, very busy schedule. And as a teacher of economics, what I want to share you that I know that this is very tough to present the technicalities of economics in front of everybody and in front of the heterogeneous group of people, those who are not always from economics background. So you have presented in such a way that everybody can understand in a very easy way what exactly going on. You have given the flow of the background, the monetary policy, the facets of monetary policy, the context, the evolution, and finally the policy, the challenges, the present challenges. And you have rightly pointed out that this is not actually a problem of COVID-19. This is the accumulated problems, because before COVID-19, we already faced a lot of problems from demand side. And on the top of that, the COVID-19 came. And again, you were talking about, that I thought that I will be asking about the TLTRO. You have nicely discussed and you have given my answer. And so many questions are there still waiting, but I need one more session with you. I need one more session with you, and not only one more session, but I need to visit your campus, and you please visit our campus again and again. And I would like to thank Professor Mukhopadhyay also to organize this wonderful session. And sir, please invite me again when our campus will be open, when we will be in new normal situation. Thank you very much, everybody present over here. And with a common note for now, that stay safe and stay sound, I would like to conclude this session over here. And I want to see you again and again. Thank you very much.